Emily kept walking through the town, going from one place to another, hoping someone would give her a job, any job. Her clothes were dirty, her hair was messy, and her face showed how hungry she was. But no one cared. "Please, do you have any job I can do?" she asked a man standing outside a shop. He looked at her from head to toe, frowned, and shook his head. "No job here," he said, turning away. Emily didn't give up. She went to a woman selling fruits at a stall. "Ma, please, I can help you carry things or sweep. I just need to eat." The woman stepped back, looking disgusted. "Go away, girl. You'll scare my customers." Emily's heart sank, but she still begged, "Please, just anything." The woman waved her hand angrily. "I said go." Everywhere she went, it was the same. People looked at her and only saw a dirty girl. They didn't see her pain. They didn't see how hard she was trying. Some even laughed. Others just ignored her like she was invisible. By evening, Emily was tired. Her feet hurt. Her stomach growled louder than ever. She sat down by the side of the road, tears rolling down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "Is there no one kind left in this town?" But deep inside, even though her heart was heavy, she told herself she wouldn't give up. Tomorrow, I would try again. That night, Emily had nowhere to go. With no home, no money, and no one to help her, she found a quiet corner near the street and lay down in a gutter. The ground was cold and hard, and she was scared, but she had no other choice. She wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes, wishing for a better tomorrow. "I will continue my search in the morning," she whispered to herself. The next morning, Emily woke up early. She was tired and hungry, but she was determined. She walked through the streets, looking for any place where she might find help. After some time, she saw a small restaurant by the roadside. The smell of food made her stomach growl. She gathered her courage and walked in. A few customers were eating, and the place looked busy. A woman was giving instructions to the workers. She looked like the owner. Emily walked up to her politely. "Good morning, Ma," Emily said quietly. "Please, is there any job vacancy here? I can do anything, even if it's just washing plates." The woman, Madame Florence, turned to look at her. She noticed Emily's dirty clothes, her tired eyes, and how thin and hungry she looked. She was surprised to see a young girl in such a state. "Why do you look like this, my dear?" Madame Florence asked gently. "What happened to you?" At that moment, Emily couldn't hold back anymore. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Madame Florence put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't cry, my dear. You can start by washing plates here. It's not much, but at least it's something." Emily's eyes lit up. She quickly nodded and said, "Thank you, Ma. Thank you so much. I promise I'll work hard." Madame Florence smiled. "Let's get you cleaned up first. You can't work like this." That day, Emily felt a little hope return to her heart. She had found a small chance, and she was ready to make the most of. Emily started working at the restaurant by washing plates. Worked hard, and never complained. Madame Florence, the owner of the restaurant, quickly noticed Emily's good behavior. She liked how neat and respectful Emily was. Soon, Madame Florence began to treat Emily kindly, sometimes giving her extra food and letting her sleep in the restaurant shop. Emily was happy. She felt lucky to have a job and a boss who seemed to care about her. The other workers at the restaurant were not as close to Madame Florence as Emily was. But there was one thing Emily didn't know: Madame Florence had a secret. She didn't just run a restaurant. She used her workers, especially the young and innocent ones, to make extra money for herself. She would promise them help, food, or better pay, but behind their backs, she used their beauty, their time, and even their bodies for her own gain. Emily had no idea she was slowly being trapped in the same game. To her, everything still looked fine. But the truth was, things were about to change. One evening, after everyone had finished eating and the restaurant was getting quiet, Madame Florence called Emily to a corner. Her face was serious, but she had a small smile on her lips. "Emily," she said softly, "tonight, you will do night work." Emily was confused. She looked at Madame Florence with wide eyes. "Night work? What do you mean, Ma?" Madame Florence smiled more, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made Emily feel cold inside. "I have already collected the pay from him," Madame Florence said. Emily's heart started beating fast. "From who, Ma?" "What do you mean by night work?" she asked again, her voice shaking a little. Madame Florence leaned closer and said, "Emily, I don't make all my money from just selling food. I also make it from night work. And now, it's your turn." Emily blinked, still not understanding. "Please, Ma, can you tell me what the night work is all about?" Madame Florence just smiled again, this time wider, but she didn't answer. Instead, she told Emily to go and get ready. That was when Emily started to feel that something was not right. Emily came out of the room dressed in a long, loose maternity gown. She looked a bit unsure of herself. When Florence saw her, she burst into laughter. "Emily," Florence said, laughing, "you can't wear that for night work. That gown looks like you're going to church, not out." Emily looked confused and a little embarrassed. Florence shook her head and walked back into the house. A few moments later, she came out holding a tight, shiny, red gown. "Here," Florence said, handing it to her. "Put this on. You need to look sexy tonight." Emily slowly went back inside and changed. When she came out wearing the sexy gown, Florence's eyes lit up. "Wow," Florence said, smiling wide. "Now that's more like it. You look so sexy." Emily looked down at herself and then back at Florence, still unsure. "But, please, Ma," she said quietly, "where exactly am I going to?" Florence just smiled and touched her arm gently. "You'll soon find out," she said with a wink. Not long after, a handsome young man walked in. He greeted Florence with a smile and sat down beside her. They began talking in low voices, whispering and sometimes laughing quietly. Emily sat at the corner, confused. She kept looking at them, trying to understand what they were saying, but she couldn't hear much. Everything felt strange to her. Soon, Madame Florence stood up and came to Emily. "Now, follow him," she said, pointing to the man. "Do whatever he asks you to do." Emily opened her mouth to ask a question, but before she could speak, Florence raised her hand. "No questions," she said firmly. Emily swallowed her words and gave a small nod. She looked at the man, who was now standing and waiting by the door. Quietly, she followed him outside and got into his car. The drive didn't take long. After a few turns and silent moments, they arrived at his house. When they got inside the house, the man offered Emily a drink. "No, thank you," Emily said softly, shaking her head. He smiled kindly and sat down on the sofa. "My name is Frank," he said. "Don't be scared. I won't harm you. Just relax, we're here to have fun together." Emily's heart was beating fast. She looked at him nervously and asked, "What What kind of fun? Frank looked at her for a moment, then gave a small smile. Are you new in the game? He asked gently. Emily didn't reply. She just stared at him with fear in her eyes. Frank leaned forward and said in a calm voice, "We're here to have sex together." That's the fun. Suddenly, tears filled Emily's eyes. She covered her face with her hands and started crying. "I haven't done it before," she said between tears. I'm still a virgin." Frank's eyes widened in surprise. He sat back, shocked by her words. Frank looked at her closely and asked, "Are you really serious about what you're saying?" Emily nodded quickly, wiping her tears. "Yes, I'm serious. I swear. Please, don't touch me. I'm begging you." She looked at him with pleading eyes, her voice shaking. Frank took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "All right," he said gently. "I won't touch you." Emily let out a quiet sigh of relief and sat down on the edge of the bed. Later, she laid down, and soon she fell asleep, her face still a little wet from crying. All through the night, Frank didn't touch her. He just sat beside her, quietly watching her sleep. He kept thinking to himself, wondering how it was possible for someone like her to still be untouched, especially in that kind of life. After a long while, he made up his mind. "I won't force her," he said softly to himself. "I just can't." The next morning, Emily woke up very early. She looked around the house and saw that it was a bit untidy. Quietly, she got up and began cleaning. She swept the floor, arranged the furniture, and even wiped the tables. After that, she went into the kitchen and started making breakfast. Soon, the sweet smell of food filled the house. Frank woke up and stretched. As he looked around, he was very surprised. The whole house was neat and fresh, and the nice smell coming from the kitchen made him stop and wonder, who cleaned this place? He asked himself. And, who's cooking? He walked slowly toward the kitchen. When he got there, to his surprise, he saw Emily standing by the gas, cooking. Frank smiled and greeted her. "Good morning, Emily. Why are you stressing yourself?" Emily turned and gave him a small smile. "It's nothing," she said softly. "I just wanted to help." Later that evening, Frank and Emily sat together at the dining table. The food was quiet between them, but the air was full of feelings they didn't speak about. Frank looked at Emily and smiled. "You cook really well," he said. Emily smiled a little, then looked down at her plate. After a moment, she took a deep breath. "Frank," she said softly, "I have to go." Frank's smile slowly faded. He looked at her, confused. "Go? Go where?" "I have to go back to work," Emily said. "I can't stay here. I have work I must do." Frank shook his head. "No, don't go. I'll call you madam if that will make you stay," he said with a playful grin, trying to make her smile, but Emily didn't smile. "Frank," she said firmly, "I have to go. It's my job. I can't just stay." Frank leaned back in his chair and gave her a soft, knowing smile. "Don't worry," he said, "I'll pay you for everything. Just don't leave." Emily sat back slowly and looked at him. "No," she said gently but firmly. "Please don't touch me, Frank. I'm not here for that." Frank smiled again, this time a little differently. "I know," he said, looking at her. "But still. Something may happen." Emily didn't answer. She just looked at him, then turned and walked. Frank, still sitting down, smiled and said, "Wowoo, what a wife material." As the sun slowly went down, night came, and both of them got ready for bed. Not long after they lay down, Frank started touching Emily. But Emily gently pushed his hand away. He tried again, but she kept rejecting him. Frank began to feel frustrated, and before long, anger took over him. He forced himself on her. After it happened, silence filled the room. Emily was crying uncontrollably. Frank sat up, his heart heavy with guilt. He looked at her and said softly, "Please. Forgive me. I don't know what came over me. The urge was too strong. I didn't mean to hurt you." Tears still falling from her eyes, Emily didn't say a word. Frank moved closer, held her gently, and whispered again, "I'm sorry. Please forgive me." After a long moment, she slowly hugged him back, still shaking. They stayed that way for a while, holding each other in silence. Emily went back to her job at the restaurant. She worked hard like always, but something was different. She couldn't stop thinking about Frank. Every time she served food or cleaned a table, his face would come to her mind. She missed him more than she expected. On the other side of town, Frank was feeling the same. He couldn't sleep at night. He kept thinking about Emily, her smile, her laugh, and the way she looked at him. No matter what he did, he couldn't get her out of his mind. Days passed, but the feeling didn't go away. So one day, Frank decided he couldn't wait any longer. He went back to the restaurant to see Emily. When Emily saw Frank walk in, her face lit up. She was so happy to see him. And Frank felt the same. They talked for a while, smiling like they hadn't in days. Then Frank looked at her and said softly, "Emily, come spend the night with me." Emily's smile faded a little. "I can't," she said. "Madame Florence won't let me." Frank smiled and took her hand gently. "Don't worry about that. I'll handle it." Later that day, Frank met with Madame Florence. As always, they spoke politely, and after some talk, and probably a little cash from Frank, she agreed. Emily stepped out, already dressed and ready. Frank drove her, and together they left for his house, both of them happy to be together again. That night, Frank walked into the bedroom with a glass of drink in his hand. He handed it to her gently, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me everything about yourself," he said softly, sitting down beside her on the bed. Emily froze for a moment, her eyes welling up with tears. Without a word, she began to cry, her shoulders shaking with the weight of everything she had kept hidden for so long. Frank looked at her, his heart aching, and softly placed his hand on her back. "Why are you crying?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emily wiped her eyes, struggling to catch her breath as the tears continued to fall. She shook her head, not knowing where to start. Finally, through the sobs, she began to speak. "I've never told anyone before," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "About my family. About my father." She paused, taking a deep breath as if the words were too heavy to say. Frank listened intently, his hand still on her back, offering comfort as she opened up. She sat quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. "My dad, Mr. Jackson," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "wasn't a kind man. He was always rude and had a bad attitude. He never cared about anyone, not even his own family. My mom had shared the same attitude with my dad." Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued, "One Christmas season, there was a terrible motor accident. Both my parents died instantly. I was the only one left, all alone. I couldn't understand why it happened. It hurt so much." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But it didn't end there. My father's family, they didn't care about me either. They rejected me because my dad never took care of him. They didn't want anything to do with me after he passed away. Emily's voice grew softer as she spoke about the aftermath. The government took all of my father's properties in the city. And my father's people, they took everything in the village too. I was left with nothing. I had no home, no family, nothing. Frank sat next to her, his heart heavy with pity. He couldn't imagine how lonely and hopeless she must have felt. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, offering silent support. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said quietly, his voice full of sympathy. She looked at him with grateful eyes, but the pain in her heart was still fresh. Frank looked at Emily with a serious expression. He asked, "Where do you live?" Emily hesitated for a moment before answering, "I sleep at my madam's restaurant shop. I haven't gathered enough money to rent an apartment yet." Frank nodded thoughtfully, but then his curiosity led him to ask another question. "How old are you, Emily?" Emily looked down, not sure how he would react, and said softly, "I'm 17 years old." Frank's eyes widened in surprise, clearly shocked by her age. 17? That means you haven't finished secondary school yet, right? He asked, trying to process the information. Emily nodded quietly, "Yes, I haven't." Frank felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He looked at her and said with sincerity, "I'm so sorry, Emily. For everything, for forcing you to bed and the abuse. I didn't mean to hurt you." Emily gave him a small, understanding smile and shook her head. "It's okay. It's nothing," she said softly, trying to reassure him. Frank remained silent for a moment, his regret evident. He knew that no apology could erase what had happened, but he hoped it might bring some peace to both of them. After a few moments, Frank came closer to Emily and looked into her eyes. "Emily," he said softly, "I want you to live with me." Emily's eyes widened. She sat back a little and shook her head. "I can't, Frank," she said. "I don't want to lose my job." "I need it," Frank smiled gently. "You won't lose anything," he said. "In fact, I'll pay you myself. And not just that, I'll help you go back to school too." Emily stared at him, shocked. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Yes," Frank said, nodding. "I mean every word." Emily didn't know what to say. Her eyes filled with tears, and then she smiled. Without saying anything more, they hugged each other tightly. It was a moment full of hope, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like everything might be okay. Emily now lived with Frank. He treated her kindly, like a sister, and made sure she felt safe and loved. After some time, Frank helped Emily go back to school. She was so happy and thankful. Every day, she studied hard and never took the opportunity for granted. Years passed, and one day, Emily got admission into the university. She couldn't believe it, her dream was finally coming true. Frank supported her all the way. He paid her school fees, gave her everything she needed, and always encouraged her to keep going. Finally, the day came when Emily graduated. She wore her graduation gown with pride, smiling from ear to ear. Frank was there, clapping loudly and cheering her on. It was one of the happiest days of their lives. One evening, Emily sat quietly in the sitting room, thinking about everything that had happened. She looked up and said, "God really answered my prayers. I never supported my parents in their evil ways. I'm so glad I stayed on the right path." Then she looked straight ahead and added, "Never support anyone's bad behavior, whether it's your parents, your brother, or your sister, because you might share in their punishment. Always stand for what is right."